Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new podcast series. My name is Patrick Teahan. I'm a licensed clinical therapist specializing in childhood trauma. And what this podcast series will be focusing on, we're going to be focusing on people's individuals' expressive stories, getting to the heart of the matter that what happened to us in our childhood. We're also going to be omitting a lot of clinical jargon and just focusing on the story, not the diagnosis. And we're also going to focus on the relationship recovery process, which is the model of childhood trauma therapy that I do. It was developed by Amanda Curtin, LICSW, and is also known as RRP. So let's get into this episode. So if you were a coworker of mine back in the day, and if we knew each other enough, you'd probably become a little bit weary of me, especially when I was upset. Or maybe even weary me when I wasn't so upset. Like on a Monday, I might talk at you for 5 minutes straight about how crappy the weekend was, my roommates are crappy, or catching the bus to work was crappy, really talking at you. On a Tuesday, I might be, really heavy and dark about the state of life, or my life in general, or life in general. Also, every day would probably be mixed in with complaining and severe hatred for those that I worked for, especially around my coworkers, which kind of gets old because they're just trying to get through their day. And on a Wednesday, I might be so triggered by someone else, I might corner you and dump all my stuff on you without any consent and expect you to be totally on the same page with me and available for me. And on a Thursday, you can kind of see where this is going. A boss might ask me questions about some of the work, and I might overly talk around things in a weird, tangential, disassociative way and give way too much unnecessary information to the point that they might need to redirect me back to the original question. At other times, if I felt like I was disappointing you, I would codependently try to make things work from an intense shame-based place. Hope that makes sense. And if there was drama or things said in private, I'd have to know what it was about, and I'd probably be a little bit intrusive with you. So when you think about all that energy I had going on, or what it was like to be my coworker, it's even worse if you were in a relationship with me, because I would do all that stuff there too, especially when I was upset. And I started to have a reputation at work for these things, but also, luckily, I had a good sense of humor mixed in with these things, so it wasn't all people being overwhelmed by me 24/7. So the hard part is, when we hear feedback that we're intense or that we're heavy, we are often confused and ashamed about how we show up in relationships. It can also be new information to us that we can overwhelm others, or that we start to notice that people maybe shy away from us or get quiet around us or avoid us or even shut down around us. That sucks. And it's not good for us and it's not good for them. We're going to look at blind spots to name them so we can have more control over how we are with people, which would be good. Anytime we feel more control, it's really kind of a source of happiness because we're not triggering ourselves. If you struggle with shame about if you overwhelm others, try to pause that shame. We really can't learn new things and change our issues if we're being overly hard on ourselves where the shame is running us. So just try to pause it for now. So here goes. I'm going to name some of the issues, and I'm going to list where it comes from in childhood and what to do instead with some brief role plays later, like I'm going to model these. So how I was with a coworker and how I was with friends and people in a relationship are not the only ways that our childhood trauma can strongly impact or overwhelm others with our energy or what we're saying. We can overwhelm others in any of the following ways, and these things are really unique to us. They're unique to our story, and they're one of those oddly specific things to childhood trauma. Keep in mind about someone's vibe if they presented in front of you with any of these. Also think about what it would be like if you got overwhelmed by someone presenting with any of these. You might feel a little bit called out on these, so here goes. So here are some examples of how we can overwhelm others. So bringing intensity to conversations and our interactions, like a consistent pattern of that intensity. Being a bit chaotic or disorganized can overwhelm somebody else. Oversharing our trauma without consent or having an established relationship to kind of go there with others can overwhelm them. Giving someone endless options from an anxious, codependent place can overwhelm somebody or make them shut down a little bit. Being spacey due to dissociation and how what we come across as kind of scattered. Overly advocating for someone else's problems, like saying to someone, your boss needs to be reported right now to HR and call them right now and I'll hold your hand for you. Like, do it. Like, you're kind of forcing the issue on someone. You're not really giving them process or choice, which can make them be a bit overwhelmed and shut down. Another is putting out nonverbal hurt energy or some dark energy, like sort of almost looks like mopiness, in your hopes that someone may kind of read your mind or figure out what's going on with you and try to comfort you. or a pattern of expressing negativity, like I mentioned earlier, is the only way that you know how to connect. That was definitely me. Inserting ourselves into someone else's activities or their lives. It's like assimilating ourselves into someone's lives, which I'll come back to later. Needing to prove something to others in conversation unnecessarily can overwhelm somebody. We're almost done here. Interpreting questions as accusations or feeling exposed and becoming reactive. Like someone's questions, like I mentioned with that boss, means you're on defense mode, which can overwhelm somebody. Having high expectations of others and not seeing their humanity or just their availability. And assuming closeness without process. Another is monopolizing a conversation can definitely overwhelm people. Last one is constantly exploring or seeking out lying or finding hidden hypocrisy in what people are saying or some cognitive dissonance in friends and relationships or whatever. That can very much overwhelm people. That could be very much be coming from a trauma place. So what might be a couple of things that you do or have done in the past in terms of that list? What might be a couple of things that you see others doing that is very triggering for you? And hard question here, do you have a parent that does any of those? So we can all approach all of those examples as behaviors that we either pick up from our dysfunctional family, or they're like a childhood trauma response that we came up with on our own in response to the abuse, in response to our family. And as a side note, when I say overwhelm, I don't always mean that someone falls apart or gets really activated in front of us or triggered in a big way. Mostly when I say overwhelm, the other person kind of gets drained. And they might go a little bit quiet around us, or that our energy affects their ability to be present with us, which is kind of natural, and I'll talk more about the other person later. And of course, the other person can have issues, like maybe they're avoidant, but we're focusing on how we affect others and our energy, what we bring into things. And I'll say more about that later, about what other people can bring in. An additional side note, those examples may have different causation or etiology with neurodivergence. I'm giving these in context of neurotypical experiences here, just FYI. How overwhelming others affects our relationships. Here are some examples of what happens to our relationships when we possibly overwhelm others with our childhood trauma stuff. Consistent intense energy is going to affect our intimacy with others, and we'll end up feeling confused or mad or abandoned, or worse, like really ashamed of it, to be honest. And others may feel that we're needy, and I know that that's a complicated word, or that we need to be talked down from our emotions by other people, which creates a relationship imbalance. And overwhelmed people space out. I definitely have, or they leave, or they check out of our conversation with them if our communication energy is intense or indirect, which might make us kind of double down and dig into our intensity further to get through to them. So there's a little bit of a snake eating its tail that happens. It's like a feedback loop. The other person can also feel trapped with our unconscious talking or our intense energy, or they feel like they have to walk us through what we're saying if we're a little bit dissociative. Like they have to kind of like hold our hand through that a little bit. And if we have big expectations coming from our inner child, our relationships can really become imbalanced, or the other person can become avoidant, and we'll project parental figures onto others, like expecting them to be omnipotent and omnipresent for us, like being highly attentive. And this is really a big one. It's a setup from our childhood trauma, like through emotional neglect. And like us, others can struggle with the guilt and shame of not knowing how to help us, and that creates a tricky dynamic. Mainly when we have these going on, we can feel terrible about ourselves, and we can get caught in shame spirals and not feel connected with being on top of things, like feeling good about ourselves. We can let our trauma take away our ability to feel chill, grounded, and capable, because we all have capacity to do that. No one wants to be present in that way in their relationships. For most of us, these will manifest in the biggest ways in our romantic relationships, where our inner child really has a tendency to project parental figures onto others. But they can show up in any other social part of our lives as well, like with therapists, with strangers, coworkers, you name it. So what is confusing is many of these issues is simply normal human experiences, such as being upset and needing to connect with someone, or being a little bit chaotic because you just lost a job or a pet. All that stuff is super appropriate and natural and human, but it's actually these patterns of intensity and stuckness that can help you see that it could be an over-the-top trauma response that's affecting your relationships by overwhelming others. Stick around for my final thoughts where I clarify these if you're feeling a little bit called out or irritated, which is understandable. Related to all that, here are two related childhood trauma reasons why we might have patterns of overwhelming others. The first is what I call the vacuum. So we often grow up in what I call neglect vacuums, where the feedback, the modeling, and parental mirroring in our abusive families is either really off or non-existent. So we grow up and we assume that talking at somebody or showing up with intense energy or people-pleasing is possibly normative because in a way we don't really have a frame of reference otherwise. We're raised in a system that has no idea of the effect it had on others. The system didn't have that, and we're not going to be able to have that fully. That system, our families, can also have taught us our dysfunctional ways to kind of connect. If you feel like you shoot in the dark a lot socially or feel like you didn't get the handbook that others have, it might be due to growing up in such a vacuum. And if we have a deficit of connection and help in our development during childhood, that's going to spill over in our adulthoods, that deficit. It's going to spill out onto others, or it's going to go underground and we're going to avoid connection. And the same as growing up with a deficit of, say, being understood. That's another kind of factor in this. We bring in some energy about needing to be understood. So the vacuum is often about not really knowing where the line is with other people. The second major factor is that we seek a parent in others. Our inner child is often looking for a deep, unconditional parental experience in others, and we want 100% acceptance. We want the other person's presence and understanding and validation by someone. It's not always bad, but it's just how much are we expecting? It's not bad to want those things, but it doesn't really work like that in adulthood. This is really a projection of unmet needs, which I'll talk about later. And as childhood trauma survivors, we are often in an extreme lack of those things growing up, and we try to get them from others in different ways. Raise your hand out there if you were that kid in class that would answer all the questions because you just wanted that sense of connection with the teacher, then feel like kind of like a dork about it. I was definitely that kid. And seeking a parent in others is often about misplaced expectations. You'll know that you struggle with this one if you find yourself rushing or overshooting or even sort of burdening folks that you think that they have the answers. I know I did that a lot, and I hope that that makes sense. So let's categorize these things. Here are types of overwhelming energy. So when I say energy, I mean affect. And affect is how our emotions present themselves in our personhood. Like my affect right now is engaged, maybe a little bit excited, probably a little bit dorky. I've got a vibe to myself. That's my affect. Let's now take that list of issues and behaviors from earlier and subgroup them for some clarity. Think about these types as something your inner child is trying to finally get from a relationship or is reacting from a place of childhood trauma. So I'm trying to help people name and identify where their energy or communication style is coming from due to their childhood trauma to have some better control over it. These will definitely come up in romantic relationships where most of our childhood projection happens again. So I'm voicing these in terms of how we communicate, how we say things, and our affect energy and what is brought into our conversations. So I've broken these behaviors up into 4 categories. There's communication energy, which applies to the other 3. Then there is rescue energy, validation energy, and preoccupied energy, like we have something going on. So communication energy can look like oversharing or dumping on someone. Like I said earlier, monopolizing a conversation, being vague or unclear, being tangential, being intense, or being overly thorough on details, like being in a really kind of keyed up place. Rescue energy can look like seeking immediate action from others, involve a bit of overstepping kind of boundaries a little bit, can usually involve big requests, like will you drop everything right now and talk to me? It can also look like trying to assimilate in someone else's life, like it's a little bit like inviting yourself into someone's life a little bit, kind of wanting a rescue. Another is expecting someone to read your mind. The third one is validation energy, where we're needing others to agree with us. We can be defensive when questioned. The issue is kind of way too important to us because we're triggered at the time. And we can be expecting a specific outcome from someone. We're expecting a certain level of energy from them, and we can get really triggered when we don't get it. And again, there could definitely be something going on with the other person. Or validation can really be kind of assuming attention from people. Preoccupied energy involves kind of being chaotic or disorganized, which can overwhelm somebody. It can be simply struggling with dissociation, can definitely overwhelm someone else. When we're vague, when we're a little bit shut down, when we're really stuck in the upset and we're kind of losing our ability to converse with somebody, or we're really sitting in the freak out and people can kind of pick up on that. We're sitting in that energy. Some kind of underlying factors for all three. Some communication energy can really be projecting perpetrators and or unmet parental needs on somebody. Rescue energy is often really involving projecting unmet parental needs on the other person. Validation energy can be projecting perpetrators and or projecting unmet parental needs, and preoccupied energy can be about projecting perpetrators as well as unmet parental needs. Lastly, we can be combinations of all three of these. Typically, we're kind of one or the other. It can depend on who we are talking to, how our inner child shows up with them. It might be different in terms of an authority figure than a peer, but they can definitely overlap. It can be definitely different combinations of each one. Now let's get into what each type actually looks like and what to do about them. So let's actually do a couple role plays from each one. I'll play what it looks like when we're exhibiting this behavior and potentially overwhelming someone else. And I'm also going to give an alternative, and that is not going to be the direct opposite of it, in what you could say in these situations. It's more of ownership over our issues to prevent the person from being overwhelmed so much. You'll see what I mean later. People get overwhelmed if they feel responsible or stuck with us. I'm sure you've been in similar positions with others, which we can all really relate to. What tends to not overwhelm someone is if we have ownership over our stuff and we let the other person know that we're aware. And it kind of takes the pressure off the person. In these role plays, let's imagine a hypothetical with a friend at work that our inner child might think there is more closeness than there actually is, which I've definitely done a bunch of times. Maybe the relationship, we take things too fast. Say you and the coworker talk and you know them for a few months and get along, but they maybe just see it as a coworker relationship and you might see it as something deeper. This is really a common situation for childhood trauma survivors, again, where we don't know where the line is, coming back to the vacuum, coming back to parental figures. Let's say in this hypothetical that the trauma survivor who tends to overwhelm just got an email from their boss that triggered them, and they want help from the coworker about it. Remember, they don't really know the coworker very well, but they kind of assume that they do.
Hey, do you have a second? Did you just see that email? Oh my God, I already said I can't make that meeting. They knew that when they hired me. And I'm like so triggered right now because it takes me right back to my family where it doesn't matter if I can or can't show up for things. This just happened last month when I couldn't make my niece's birthday. My mom like raged at me and I had a panic attack in the car. And I'm working in therapy about my mom. She's a raging narcissist, okay? And she used to make me do my sister's homework, which is like similar to this. And I've started having panic attacks and like, I know you have a partner. My partner kinds of gets it, but doesn't really get it. Like back in December, we spent a weekend with his family and they are so dysfunctional. Like, oh my God, I had to take a walk every hour because it was just like, I'm sure you felt the same way about this. Hey, do you have a second? Did you just see that email that went around? Like, maybe you don't know this, but like I said when I was hired that I couldn't make those, and I'm to be honest, I'm a little bit triggered about it. Just dysfunctional family stuff. I'm happy to tell you about that at some point when we know each other more. But like, wow, I just needed kind of someone to talk to and just maybe tell me that it's just dumb work stuff and it's not really bigger than it is. Like I'm sure you've been there. Like, whoa, thanks. Did you saw that email, right? Well, I just wanted to kind of talk to you about it because it's like it reminds me of my old job where like nothing was in sync, and I'm trying to do this new job and trying to be different there. And I was like my partner and I were talking over the weekend when we were trying to find this lunch place that I thought about you about it because I wondered if you're a sushi person. I can send you the link. That is amazing, like scorched. Anyway. So yeah, and it's like I can't make those, and it reminds me of like when I was in college, there was a professor that I was a double major, so I was studying communication and also like sort of relevant to like what we're doing now. And he was from Dallas, and we grew up around Fort Worth, Texas, and it's kind of like this in the way that I couldn't really get him to see that I couldn't really kind of do things. And I remember one time my family, well, it's a separate thing. Did you see that email just now about the meeting? I'm a little bit triggered because in a sign of when I'm triggered, I have a hard time putting my thoughts together. So just be like a little bit patient for me. Let me just kind of gather my thoughts. tell me it's just dumb work stuff and not really a thing that I need to go down the rabbit hole, because I'll lose track of my day. Hopefully I'm making sense here, but like, right? It's typical for them, right? Thank you.
Here are some possible childhood trauma issues that drive our communication style, which might overwhelm others. So, lack of modeling around healthy communication. For example, we might monopolize a conversation because that was what was done at home. Or we might come from a very shut down family or shame-based family, so connecting makes us a bit scattered and glitchy. Maybe we were raised by a parent who modeled oversharing and crossed boundaries and didn't read others. Another example is, say, being shot down as a child and judged when we just wanted to connect. And this can make us have some over-focused on being believed or anticipating being yelled at by someone's tone when they're speaking. Like we're anticipating that coming. We can also overshare due to neglect or even coming from a family with really poor boundaries. Our inner child often struggles with where the line is in these relationships in terms of closeness and newness.
Hey, did you see that email? I could really use your help right now. I'm pretty triggered about it, and I was wondering if I gotta formulate a response to them. Like, I know you're busy, but would you mind coming back to my cube, like right now, and just kind of sitting with me while I craft a response? Because I kind of want to be clear. I'm just really freaked out, and I want to be really clear. And maybe and that might be coming up on lunch, so maybe we can go out and kind of have lunch and kind of talk about it. Would that be okay? Hey, did you see that email that went out about the meeting? Yeah, like I've told them, like, when they hired me, I couldn't make it. I don't want to bother you if you're really, really busy. I just kind of want to be talked down a little bit, and I can handle this myself. I don't want to be too burdening you with stuff. So, do you have any suggestions on how I should respond, just real quick, and then I'll go back and kind of take care of it? You know them better. Awesome. Thanks. So it happened again. He emailed me, and I'm sure you know, like, I just can't. Like, I can't make that meeting, and he knows that. Oh, you're right. You weren't there when I told her, but it's just like when they hired me back in April, and remember, like, when I didn't get the offer letter. Oh, right. You were hired after me, like, but I just don't know what to do. Like, just like, I'm sure you're like aware of what's going on. Hey, do you have a second? Like, you're probably not aware of everything, and I'm like new here, and I just need a little bit of help. They emailed me to kind of make that meeting. I had explicitly told them that I can't make that meeting. I just want to kind of, them better, maybe. And do you have any advice on maybe like what I should do, or do you want me to tell you more about like what, like the background to this is?
So here are some possible childhood trauma issues that drive having rescue energy and overwhelming others. A big example is actually needing a rescue during your childhood out of the abuse and out of neglect. Spend some time with young children and you'll see just how much they need healthy adults to see and be with them and help them. You'll also see that small children assume their parents know everything about their world when it comes to things like mind reading. Another example, if we were treated a certain way in childhood, we might put all of our energy into providing a rescue for someone else in adulthood. We can overwhelm others by trying to rescue them because we know what it's like to not have a rescue or be long overdue for it. Another example is we can project parents onto others and try to get them to rescue us because in childhood, we try to do things or wish people would notice us. And this might look like hoping your partner reads that you're really struggling instead of telling them directly. Guesswork can really overwhelm somebody.
Can you believe their email? Like, I'm not crazy, right? Like, I know they're gonna fire back some stupid corporate bullshit that it's mandatory or something like that. But I told them, and you were there when I told them, right? No, I shouldn't have to say it again. Why would I do that? Why can't they just do their job and put it in their calendar? Like, they expect us to put it in their calendar. You're not thinking I should kind of go to them, right? Like, I'm not going to do this, right? Like, I'm not the one who did it, Hey, you saw that email, and I'm like a little bit triggered. And I tend to like want people on my side about this, so I don't want to really do that with you. But do you have any advice on how I should respond to them? Because it's like I've told them a couple times I can't do this, and I'm so new. Thank you.
And here are some possible childhood trauma issues that drive validation energy in terms of overwhelming others. Like the other examples, growing up in neglect creates an energetic deficit of needing validation from others. Our inner child is still waiting to be seen and is trying to get that from others. But others can't give us that in the way that we need in adulthood. It really needs to come from more of an internal place for childhood trauma survivors. And due to that, we can actually monopolize in the present for lacking of being valued in the past, or that it was actually learned from parents. Hopefully that makes sense. Another big example is being the family scapegoat growing up can really make us perseverate on fighting to be right, and even overly fighting just about how we feel in a given situation when there doesn't really need to be a fight. Another example is being consistently shot down in childhood in unnecessary ways can really make us give off a need for validation in our adulthood. Like we overly need people to tell us that we're not crazy when that's not really necessary anymore.
Hey, did you see that email? I am kind of lost, and like back when I was hired, I told him that I couldn't make certain meetings, and they seemed to be cool with it, like at the time. And then like this is it's like a big schedule kind of like mix up, and I'd have to change things around, and I just don't know what to, do you have any thoughts? Hey, did you see that email? Yeah, you may not know this, and you got to forgive me. I'm a little bit triggered, and then when I'm triggered, I kind of go in and out of like being cognitive. But I'm a little bit lost, and I just kind of want to know if you have any advice, because I don't want to kind of like take up too much time, but I really appreciate it.
And lastly, here are some possible childhood trauma issues that drive some preoccupied energy in overwhelming others. If you grew up with shameful secrets, as I mentioned in other videos, that fear and shame can run us, and we might present a little bit unfocused or chaotic. It's like having something going on in the background when we're trying to communicate with others. Or if we developed a freeze response during childhood to abuse, in intense situations, we can struggle to be present in conversations and lose our thoughts and lose our focus and get caught up in a kind of a shame loop, like I mentioned earlier. Now that person knows I don't have it together, and think, what do I say? You know, it's really awful. If we grew up where we had to prevent attacks from abusive parents by presenting a certain way, such as our inner child creating intense pressure to nail an exchange with someone to control any potential criticism or control any kind of reaction from them, that pressure can really make us glitchy or preoccupied. It's a lot like holding our breath while trying to talk. And again, there can be many reasons for all of these, and I'm giving them kind of in general ways, and it's really helpful to start thinking about the origins of this stuff for yourself and work with your inner child on them. So some final thoughts. What about the other person? Patrick, my partner is the most shut down person you'll ever meet. I have to talk at them. Or Patrick, people play devil's advocate with me all the time, and of course I have to talk through that BS. Or bro, like what's the difference between being compassionate and caring about someone versus being too much when the person can't help themselves or get things done, like when we're trying to rescue them? It all can be true. The other person can, and often does, have issues, but our only way out of these cycles is to not keep doing the things that we do that don't work. We have to let go of the outcomes, such as getting through to somebody, like say to a shutdown partner, or having more confidence in communicating differently. The tricky thing is, say the other person is perfectly well adjusted and healthy. We'll still have our stuff that overwhelms people like that when we're upset. And however, we can actually practice being more real, like I mentioned in those role plays, with the other person to start to get out of these things. For example, say to your partner that you notice you can overwhelm them during upset, and it seems like it happens more when they're not really being present. try to do that from really a non-charged place. Like it's just you're having a casual, non-charged fighting conversation about it, and see where that takes you. Tell a friend who maybe plays devil's advocate with you that you notice that you get more defensive when they seem to give other possibilities, which makes you feel not seen and ashamed. I'm not saying that's always going to work, but there's a difference in terms of doubling down or getting nowhere with somebody. Another question you might be having through the video or relating to this stuff is sort of saying to yourself, oh my God, am I too much? It's kind of impossible through our lives to not be too much sometimes. Try to flip that shame-based question to the idea that you were set up for these reactions and behaviors. When we're asking if we're too much, we're really actually struggling with what our toxic parent or neglectful parent did to us or put us in a certain type of role, not so much about the present relationships. It's really our inner child popping up there. As a little kid, you absolutely weren't too much, but abusive, neglectful, and toxic parents will create those stories that we were too much, that we were extra, when the truth is that they were extremely entitled and irresponsible with their parenting if you went through childhood trauma. So in childhood, we probably got this message that we were too much. And like a panic attack, the more we think about it in the moment, the worse it gets. Am I too much? Am I too much? And if our inner child is reacting or deeply feeling that place of am I too much, it's a good opportunity to do some reparenting work and see if you can prevent some of that self-sabotaging kind of behaviors. And lastly, how I was able to sort of get some feedback and work on the ways that I was overwhelming people is I was sort of in therapy at the time, kind of aware of these things, but I was also in an interpersonal group with healthy people to be able to kind of get some feedback. That's really hard to find, I get it, but I think we need some healthy mirroring from people to kind of correct a lot of this stuff. I would love to hear your thoughts, situations, stuff I didn't maybe kind of cover, questions that you might have. And as always, may you be filled with loving kindness, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, and may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.